everybody, so we've got a fun review today because we're talking about the upcoming new adaptation to Stephen King's Firestarter. When it comes to Stephen King adaptations, I'm always going to have some level of excitement going into these because of the fact that I'm such a massive fan of his work, and while the original Firestarter from 1984 has never been one of my particular favorites of all of his different adaptations over the years, I do think it is fairly decent, and it is a film that I think that you could definitely update for a new audience because it has been a very long time. We've seen a lot of influences in media nowadays, like Stranger Things I feel like pulls a lot from this material, and with someone like Blumhouse behind the helm, I feel like this is something that could be very interesting for new audiences to see. Firestarter follows a girl named Charlie who develops the powers of pyrokinesis, which allows her to set things on fire with her mind. Together with her father, both of them are on the run from a secret government entity known as the Shop, who is going to stop at nothing to get her back. With this film having next to no promotion, it's going to be on Peacock the same day it's in theaters, and the fact that they did not give this film to critics to screen until the day it's released in theaters, you can imagine why I was a little bit worried here that I thought it maybe could potentially be some kind of dumpster fire, no pun intended. Comparisons to the original aside, there are moments sprinkled throughout the film that are genuinely quite exciting. Many of them are thanks to our new lead playing Charlie in this film, played by Ryan Kiera Armstrong. With the material given to this character in this new version of Firestarter, I felt like she brought a lot to the role. She brings a lot of depth and emotion to her character, and we witness how as she gets older it becomes harder and harder to control these powers, but when she does unleash them on these people, of course they're bad people because you gotta make sure that they're bad people that we're hurting, it gets pretty crazy. By far the most exciting elements to this film, which I think a lot of people expected going into it, was seeing her powers fully be unleashed. If that's your main reason for wanting to see this new version of Firestarter, I think you're going to leave very satisfied because it's pretty intense and genuinely pretty terrifying depending on the scene. For example, the big massive finale where we see Charlie fully unleash her powers and her full capabilities, much like in that first film, you know, the first film with Drew Barrymore, it looked a little bit goofy, let's be real here, it was the 80s. Nowadays, with the new technology and we're a little bit more brutal, a little bit more intense, it's awesome. I mean, that's just the best way to describe it at this point. It feels very superhero-y though, which I'll circle back to later on in the review. Many people, including myself, felt very old seeing Zac Efron is going to be portraying the father in this film because of the fact that, you know, Zac Efron, we grew up with Zac Efron, we're around the same age, and just seeing him actually be a dad just makes me feel very old. But nevertheless, I think he does play the role very well. The bond that he has between him and his daughter, I think, bolsters the material as best as it can because they do have pretty solid chemistry. The film doesn't make it all that difficult to be rooting for them as they're on the run because pretty much outside of those two characters, almost everybody else in the film is extremely unlikable. The villains in Firestarter in general, whether it be the Shop, John Rainbird, they just lack any kind of substance, which is one of the bigger problems of the film as a whole, is that pretty much most of the characters outside of the main family, they're extremely one-dimensional characters. Suppose they try to do a little bit with John Rainbird, kind of giving us some sort of backstory to the character, but it doesn't really end up going anywhere, which is kind of one of the more annoying things about the film in general. If this version of Firestarter had a much stronger script, I genuinely feel like it could have been a much better experience overall due to the fact that this film is kind of bogged down by the lackluster script. Dialogue aside, I mean, we've seen a lot of this cringy dialogue in the trailer, like that liar, liar, pants on fire line, extremely on the nose. There are stretches in the film where it's clear it's not really sure what it wants to be. I suppose that you can label Firestarter as a horror film to some degree. I do have to commend them for pushing that R rating with some kind of gory, gross moments, but most of the film we kind of treat Charlie like she's a superhero. I mean, montages and all. We see montages like superhero style. To be fair, Firestarter does lean a bit more into the science fiction aspect than horror, but the way that I describe it in detail, it's much more interesting than actually how it unfolds on screen. It's just not as interesting when you watch it unfold in this story. With such an interesting concept like this, it's a very standard setup here, and a lot of stuff doesn't happen in the film itself. It almost feels like the beginning of a film because it's kind of a big setup for something to come later on. It feels like almost like this is the beginning of like a sort of trilogy, franchise, whatever you want to call it, which does feel kind of weird. As I do want to end on a more positive note, we gotta talk about the music in the film. It's absolutely fantastic, which is not a big surprise because it's done by John Carpenter and the rest of the crew that did the music for Halloween and Halloween Kills, which also includes his son. It's very interesting just how much of a Halloween connection there is to this film because the writer of the film also helped write Halloween Kills, but the music, it's stellar. It's John Carpenter at his best. It's not my favorite John Carpenter score or anything, but it is one of the best elements to this new version version of Firestarter, and it's just great to see him finally get to work on Firestarter, because if you weren't aware, I guess it's kind of a fun fact, he was supposed to direct the first Firestarter back in 1984, but they decided to go against that and choose someone else to direct the film after The Thing flopped in theaters, which, prompted him to do Christine. So it's just kind of interesting to see how things became full circle here. Firestarter isn't an absolute train wreck by any means. There are various bright spots where the story does shine, delivering exciting sci-fi horror elements, but it is bogged down by a lackluster script and a very short runtime, by the way. The runtime is like 94 minutes or so, and I feel like this is a film that could have used a little bit more padding, because the first film, while it does have its faults, I feel like the story itself was able to be fleshed out a bit better with that longer runtime. Out of these two adaptations, I do think I still prefer the 84 version to this new version, but I will be intrigued to hear what you guys end up thinking about the new Firestarter. If you don't go out and see it in theaters this weekend, it will be on Peacock, so if you can also just chill at home and watch it, I guess. I mean, I of course prefer the theatrical experience, but you do you. I will be curious though, what did you think of the new Firestarter? Did you like it? Did you dislike it? Which of the adaptations is your favorite between the 1984 Firestarter or even this one, or even that like mini-series one that I also saw was on Peacock, but I've never watched it before. Maybe I'll do that after this review is over, just because I'm kind of intrigued. Either way, thank you guys so much for checking out the review. I really do appreciate that. Be sure to leave a like on the video. Also, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, so review restrictions, unboxings, and more. For the next time, I'll see you guys later.